Everything's an illusion, because everything's a perception. We are interacting with this, what I call cosmic Wi-Fi, this information field that's encoded with information. If you know how reality works, you know it's malleable, you know that perception is the key to dictating what reality we experience, then you don't want the population to know that. Well, I think consciousness is what we are, you see. If people say, what are we? I would say we are awareness, a state of being aware. And we apparently, have bodies, and we have labels that people give themselves. They're just experiences. They're not who we are. They're experiences. Because this is operating within this tiny band of frequency we call the human world. And it's so tiny. I mean, if you look at what mainstream science says about the electromagnetic spectrum, it says that it's 0.005% of what exists in the universe. And the universe is just one expression of infinity. Now, that's the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see, that everything we see in what we call the visible world is within that band, is a smear, tiny smear of the 0.005%. So we are basically blind in terms of what we see and perceive compared with what there is in infinite reality, even in this universe.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It really is a pleasure to sit down with you. So your message over the years is you've been really challenging sort of the status quo and the normality in people's minds and things like that. But a deeper aspect that I feel like your work is challenging, your message is challenging, is the sort of the nature of reality, so to say. The bigger sense of like this sort of illusionary state that everyone believes the way the world is. I mean, could you speak a bit about that?
Well, we live in a world where the general population perceive everything to be solid and everything to be apart from everything else, when actually we are living in a reality that is very much akin to Wi-Fi and computers. I've been calling the body for a very long time a biological computer. And if you think we're in this hotel now, and in this room, therefore, will be Wi-Fi. But where is it? You can't see it. And if you said to people who didn't know about computers that there was a series of fields, radiation fields of information in this room, which you can tap into anywhere in the world if you have the right technology, and you can put on the screen the same worldwide reality anywhere in the world, people would say you were crazy. The first thing they'd say is, well, where is it? Can't see it. But because people now know about computers and they know about Wi-Fi, when you say that to people, they say, yeah, Wi-Fi, computers, yeah, I know about that. But the only difference is between that's crazy and yeah, I know about that, is knowledge of computers and knowledge of Wi-Fi. If people didn't have that knowledge, they would write off and dismiss an explanation of what exists, but they don't realize exists and can't perceive that it exists. And it's the same with our reality. If you look at a computer, what is it doing? It's taking waveform information and it's decoding it, and it's taking electrical information, electromagnetic information, and it's decoding it into a reality on the screen. Because if you said to people, tell me about the internet, they'd say, well, it's graphics and moving pictures and words on the screen. Well, yes, it is, but only on the screen, nowhere else. Everywhere else, the internet is a completely different form. And what I've been saying, and I've been researching this now for 30 years, is that we live in a an energetic sea of information, and it operates on a waveform level. And just as the computer decodes Wi-Fi, so we're decoding that. And you can see that through the five senses, because what the five senses are doing is taking waveform information, it's turning it into electrical information, it's communicating that to the brain, and then the brain constructs that into what I say is digital holographic information. And that digital holographic level of reality is this. It's the world we perceive to be outside of us, but it's not. You think about the internet. Where is the internet? On a computer. It's inside the computer. We're just viewing it. And what we're basically doing is the same. And if you think about sound, classic example, but all the five senses work the same way, but classic, the ears are picking up sound waves, waveform, turning it into electrical information and communicating it to the brain. Because as I'm speaking, people hearing it only hear it when that process has happened. Only when the information electrically reaches the brain do people hear me speak. It's quite an amazing thing, really, to see the reality that people perceive themselves to be experiencing against what it really is. For instance, if you ask the question, does a falling tree make a noise? Well, of course it does. Well, actually, it doesn't. Falling tree doesn't make a noise. What it does as it falls on an energetic waveform level is it disturbs the energetic field. It creates a waveform disturbance. That disturbance is picked up by the ears, communicated to the brain electrically, and the brain then decodes that into the sound of a tree falling. But if no one's there to be the decoder of that waveform disturbance, then a falling tree doesn't make a noise. Now, and you know, if you know how reality works, you know it's malleable, you know that perception is the key to dictating what reality we experience, then you don't want the population to know that. Because you knowing that and how it works and how we decode reality and how we create our own experience through the perceptions that we have, that is your enormous point of power. You don't want the population knowing that. You want them to think this is all solid, because what does solidity mean? It means limitation. Once you think you live in a solid world, what you're saying is, I can't, it's not possible all the time. Which if the world was solid, it would be impossible. But it's not, and this cabal knows that. And so it's quite a thought that you look at all these television channels now. I mean, when I first grew up, there was, as a kid, there was only the BBC, not even BBC Two, BBC. That's all there was. But now you've got all these channels and all these mainstream outlets. How many times do you see a program looking into the nature of reality?
Never.
I mean, so that's a question immediately. Why is that? I mean, why aren't we pursuing in the mainstream media where the hell we are and what this is? But it doesn't happen, except rarely and in some minor channels. And it's because we if we know that, then we can start to use that knowledge to create our reality rather than reality creating us. Because perception is everything. And that's why this whole conspiracy is about imposing, downloading to people their perception of reality. If you think of perception, it's the middle point. First of all, your perception of something, your perception of life, your perception of self, dictates your behavior. All behavior comes from perception. If I see a situation in a certain way, then I will behave towards that situation in a certain way. If I see it a different way, I'll behave differently. Everything is perception. Then you go back from perception and you think, where does perception come from? It comes from information received. That's what it is. We form our perceptions from information. Anything from a personal experience to a newspaper or a Facebook post. And therefore, once you start to realize these connections, you start to realize what this increasingly outrageous, extreme censorship is of information that's challenging all the norms, whatever it is, vaccine norms, political norms, whatever. It's because if you want to impose the perceptions of the population, thus dictate their behavior and their responses in a way that suits you, then you must control the information they receive, which will then form their perceptions. You don't want all these other people coming in and saying, actually, there is another way of looking at this, because that would challenge the perception that you want them to have, and that's why we're having all this censorship now.
Yeah.
It's systematic, and these internet giants like Facebook and Google and YouTube, owned by Google, Alphabet, its parent company, and Amazon, and all these people, they are organizations that have been systematically created as monopolies in their area of operation. So you can go through a very simple sequence of how we got here and how we've been hoaxed. In this sense, first of all, the internet was the creation of an organization called DARPA. The technology was military technology. DARPA is the technological development arm of the Pentagon. Very, very sinister organization that gives us death rays and ever new, more efficient ways of killing people. And also gave us the office assistance technology, by the way. Seed funded them. Why would a military arm of the Pentagon want to have these office assistants, this Echo and Alexa stuff in people's homes? Well, we might come to that because there is a reason. Anyway, the idea from the start was that the internet had to become a central pillar of human society to a point where it was irreversible, because this whole technological society of control, which we can get into, is founded on the internet. This is where you get the Internet of Things with, billions of gadgets and technologies and fridges and cars and televisions now connected to the internet. And to get the internet to that point where it becomes the central pillar of human society, which it has become, you can't have the internet we have now with all the censorship, because people say, oh, stuff that, not having that. So we went through a period when the internet was first launched of free flow of information, no censorship, say what you like. Now, that had to happen for the internet to become so much part of people's lives that it became this central point. But there was a downside to that period, which was the free flow of information. And what happened, of course, in that period, as I know myself, is that another or multiple other versions of possibility, reality, world events, everything, were able to be communicated, and vast numbers of people saw this new way of looking at things and went, whoa, this makes more sense than what I've been told all my life. So we've now reached the point where the internet is the central pillar of human society. It's the point where people get most of their information, and it's designed and planned to be where people get all their information, and therefore the system, DARPA and its multiple connections, including the intelligence communities, are now confident enough to say, okay, we've reached the point. Now we can start making the internet what it was always planned to be. And in the same way, you had companies, Facebook, Amazon, YouTube, Twitter, that have been promoted and supported to become near monopolies. And again, the same process. To become to reach that near monopoly situation, they had to give people what they wanted. So what do we have in the early days at the same time of the internet? We had no censorship on Facebook, no censorship on Google. The search engine reflected what people were wanting. and you had no censorship on YouTube, etc., and Twitter, and no censorship of books on Amazon, as Amazon was being financially supported to lose lots of money every year, but by not having to worry about that, was able to get this, again, near monopoly situation on book circulation, even book publishing. And all these companies now, at the same time, they've said, the internet, we've got it where we want it, now we'll make it what we plan it to be. At the same time, you're seeing these internet companies, I say controlled by the same people, who are doing the same. They're now censoring ever more blatantly, ever more outrageously. You've got Amazon now deleting books, not selling books, that are challenging the system in whatever way, including now, more recently, things that are books that are challenging the official story of vaccines. So this has been systematic. It's like having a fishing line thrown out. Oh, look at this, isn't it great? No censorship. Hey, isn't it great? And then now the fishing line's being pulled in. The target, the biggest target, of course, is the alternative media, which is challenging the official story of virtually everything, depending on what their specialization is. And you have this happening in the same period that they are inventing more and more excuses to censor. So first of all, we've got to stop terrorism. Okay. So we'll ban this and we'll ban that. Fake news. We're going to stop fake news. Well, was the BBC shut down then, surely? But no, apparently not. So fake news. So we've got to stop fake news. So we've got to ban that. We've got to ban that. We've got to ban that. Now we've got far-right white supremacy and white nationalism. We've got to ban that. And so it goes on. No, you can't say that because somebody will be upset. And this is the other part of that, is that all these things are seamlessly connected. They're all expressions of the same thing. I hear people say, you see conspiracies everywhere. No, I don't. I see one conspiracy with multiple faces and multiple facets. And so you look at political correctness, and that is connected into all this, because political correctness, which is a means of getting the target population to silence itself, is now being used more and more as multiple excuses to censor. And therefore, the more that you can get people, quote, upset and self-identified as a victim across the multiples of subjects and situations, the more upset people you have, the more sense of victimized people you have, the more excuses you've got to say, no, you can't say that because it upsets this person. You can't say that, it upsets that person. And this is the whole foundation of it. That which is behind all this couldn't give a damn who's upset, but it could give a damn about using that to justify censorship. And fascism, or actually what it is Marxism, but because fascism and Marxism are basically expressions of the same thing, centralized tyranny, they use the same techniques. So it can get confusing sometimes. Is this fascism or Marxism? It doesn't matter, it's tyranny.
Yeah.
But because there aren't people in jackboots goose-stepping down the street, and that nice Mark Zuckerberg in his grey t-shirt, hey man, hey, grey t-shirt, I'm one of you, man. He can't be horrible. Well, he is. The people running these companies, from Bezos and all through, are actually disgusting people, running disgusting companies for disgusting reasons, because they have utter and total contempt for freedom of expression and the right of every individual to have their free opinion. They have contempt for that, and don't let the smiley grey T-shirt images of people like Brin and Page that run Google, who go down the same road of I'm a progressive, I'm one of you. Don't let them confuse you and hoodwink you, because they have a very, very dark agenda. But even they are only front people.
Yeah, definitely.
I whether you've seen, you must have done, everybody must have seen it, or most people, Mark Zuckerberg on Capitol Hill being questioned by
I've seen it. Congress.
By a congressional committee. I mean, when you see those headlights of an oncoming train eyes staring on that almost terrified face, well, not even almost, right? And being
he's like a robot.
Yeah, and being disarmed by the even the most mild questioning, which someone like that should have instant answers for. You kind of get the feeling, not wrong, by the way, that he doesn't run Facebook, and I say Bezos doesn't run Amazon. They all, in the end, go deep in the shadows, and they're controlled by the same group, the same network, which is running this agenda of making free speech disappear. And I'll just finish on this point with this. I have a phrase I use: know the outcome and you'll see the journey. Because if you don't know what the outcome is planned to be, events on the way to that outcome can seem like random events. Just this happens, that happens, that happens. Once you know what the outcome is designed to be, then the events are no longer random. You can see the process, the progress towards the outcome. And you now have a situation where the outcome that is desired is quite simply this: that the point is eventually reached where no one ever hears anything or sees anything in the public arena that the system doesn't want them to see and hear. And to do that, you have to destroy freedom of speech. Because while freedom of speech exists, you have the freedom to speak and challenge and say things that are outside what the system wants people to see and hear. So free speech has to go. That's why it's being deleted, because it's preventing that planned outcome of people only seeing what the system wants them to see or hear. And it's a very, very dangerous situation that we're facing now. And I cannot impress upon people just how extreme it is, and that apart from the jackboots and the goose stepping, we are moving into a very, very dark and dangerous era.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, restriction of freedom of speech is really an important topic, and I mean, we like to see it as that as a society, to have a healthy society, you should be able to have access to all sides of the conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
So I really feel. And just before as well, when you were speaking about the illusionary state of reality, a big question I wanted to ask you is what do you think the role of consciousness plays in that?
Well, I think consciousness is what we are, you see. If people say, what are we? I would say we are awareness, a state of being aware. Because we are sitting here now, and we apparently, have bodies, and we have colours, and we have labels that people give themselves and society gives you. I am this religion, I am this race, I am this income bracket, I am. But they're just experiences. They're not who we are. They're experiences. I mean, look, we come into this world, and in a ridiculously short time, we leave this world. And yet we self-identify the I with what happens in that transitory tiny little period between one and the other. I saw an advert. It obviously wasn't a great advert to sell things because I can't remember what it was for, but it was a brilliant, brilliant concept. And it had a baby coming out at birth and flying through the air like a missile. And as it was traveling through the air at massive speed, it was getting older and older and older. Then eventually it crashes into a grave at the other end as an old person. And you know, that's very symbolic of, you know, life. I'm coming up 67 now, and you know, I tell you, it goes like that. But we self-identify with what happens in between. Well, what happens before and after? We are consciousness, awareness. We are that which is having the experience. You know, I'm aware of you, and I'm aware of the room, and I'm aware of what's happening here. What is aware of it? Is it this vehicle for my consciousness that's aware of it, or is it the consciousness for which this is a vehicle that's aware of it? And when people, you know, you read, I've read endless accounts now over the years of near-death experiences where people talk about their point of observation, leaving the body, looking down on the body, even going out into realms of other realities while the body has ceased to function. And then the body is revived and they return. Well, what is leaving, what is moving its point of attention is that awareness. And that's who we are, that's the I. Now here's a fantastic irony, I mean we're drowning in ironies, is that my philosophy on life is that we are points of attention within an infinite stream of consciousness, goes across multiple dimensions, multiple realities into infinity. We're a point of attention. So your point of attention can be so tiny that you completely self-identify with the labels. And you might say, who are you? Or I'm Bill and I drive a bus. No. You are consciousness having that experience. You are not Bill, and you're not driving the bus is not who you are. It's what you're doing. You are consciousness. You're the consciousness that is an eternal expression of infinite states of awareness. So you can so focus attention that you believe you're Bill driving a bus, and that's who you are and nothing more. Or you can be a point of attention that expands its awareness and its sense of self and reality and says, I am infinite awareness having the experience, whatever label you give it. And that is a completely different way of looking at life. Because when you think I am the labels, you are in the world and you are of it. Everything that you experience, all the information that you glean for your perception comes from the belief that you are your labels. And of course, that is obviously going to give you a self-identity of limitation. What can I do? I'm only are. But when you self-identify with being consciousness, awareness, no form, they're just vehicles for experiencing certain bands of frequency, like this one, which is tiny, by the way. But when you self-identify with being the consciousness having the experiences themselves do not have the same impact upon you. Because when you experience a situation and you believe that is you in your totality, then the experience and you basically become the same thing, and thus it has this massive impact upon you. So for instance, if you're ridiculed or people hurl abuse at you, if you're self-identifying with the labels that they are abusing and ridiculing, then that becomes a very powerful thing. But when you self-identify with being consciousness having an experience, the same abuse and the same ridicule does no effect at all, ultimately, if you expand your self-identity enough, because you know it's just a here today, gone tomorrow experience. And the people that are the source of it are just ignorant and obviously have their own problems, or they wouldn't do that. So you just kind of smile and move on. It's a completely different way of interacting with reality. But of course, when you start to expand your awareness and you expand it, you start to expand it beyond this programmed reality, which is basically founded on control of information. If you look at the mainstream media, what I call the mainstream everything, mainstream science, mainstream medicine, mainstream politics, mainstream all of it, it's basically an information construct. I call it in my talks and books the postage stamp consensus. It's a tiny band of information and perception of reality. And if you stay within that tiny band, which is taught in the schools and the universities and the colleges, and it's pounded out 24/7 in the media, then you are considered normal. And what they're really saying is not that you're normal, but you are conforming to what we want you to believe is normal and how things are. So when your focus of attention is so focused on that, only on that postage stamp consensus perception of everything coming from the mainstream, then the only information you're getting to form your perceptions, thus your behavior, is coming from the mainstream. It's coming from newspapers and mainstream sources, television news, whatever. And it's coming from people around you who are on the same postage stamp you're on. Mm-hmm. But when you let your consciousness expand, once you self-identify with being consciousness, potentially infinite in its scale, instead of being the labels, now your consciousness starts to travel and connect with levels of reality, levels of perception, levels of information that is way beyond the postage stamp. Now, instead of being in the world and of it, and you're trying to make sense of a world while getting information to make sense of the world from that world, and only that world. I mean, what's that going to do except keep you on the like a mouse on the running around the wheel.
Hamster wheel.
Instead, you're starting to get inspiration and insight. And basically what you're doing is you start to look at the world from outside the world. When I say the world, I mean this reality. And you start to see it in a completely different way. Suddenly, instead of everything being random dots, now you can see the connections. Now, instead of pixels, you see pictures. And you see how everything's connected. And it's a completely different way of seeing the world. But of course, when you start to do that, and you start to articulate what you're observing, that which is still on the postage stamp in the world and of it thinks you're absolutely bonkers. Yeah. Crazy, mad, because they literally, and this, go back to the computer analogy, they literally can't compute what you're computing. Not that you're better than them, but you are seeing the world in a much more expanded way. And as I've gone around the world, particularly since 2016 on a world speaking tour, where they let me in these days, the number of people from all the walks of life and backgrounds who are going through this process of reassessing the world, reassessing self, is phenomenal compared with what it's been before. And because of the suppression of information and this focus on this postage stamp, I mean, watch any BBC, ITV news bulletin, you'll see the postage stamp reported, that's all, nothing beyond it. People don't realize the scale of the wake-up that's happening. And they're trying to shut that down with the censorship. But, once it starts, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very difficult to put it back. And they know that, because in so many ways what's happening now with the censorship, extremely arrogant, we'll do what we like. But behind the arrogance is actually panic.
Yeah.
Because they know the consequences for their control system of people waking up to reality beyond the control system. And it is happening, but definitely not on the scale we would like, but it's happening greater than I've ever seen.
Yeah, great points, by the way. And before, when you were speaking about this infinite expression of consciousness and this infinite awareness of consciousness, when you explain the driver on the bus and stuff like that, how if he has the perspective that he is, not identify as the role that society gives him, identify as the role of consciousness. Do you think that, because the question I've asked myself on that is, if that is the case, and I know for myself, we're not the role that society gives us, and I'm with you as well, that we are this infinite expression of consciousness, just living out these lives through these avatars and things like that. Do you think that we are actually consciousness, sort of getting to know ourselves?
Well, I think it's like everything. When you grow up as just on the level of a human being, you have experiences and you learn from them. Well, if you've got any sense, you do. Mm-hmm. So that process happens anyway. The question is this a choice? Has everyone chosen to experience this? I don't think that's necessarily the case, because has a fly chosen to get caught on the fly trap?
Yeah.
Right? And in many ways, what humanity is in is a fly trap, and it's a fly trap that's based on actually a simulated reality, which is what this is. So the story is much, much bigger than it even at first appears to the alternative media. But everything is an experience, and thus everything is a potential road to greater wisdom. And on that whole point, you can look at this control system and you could say it's a small number of people controlling a large number of people, which it is. But it's also a massive, massive lesson, if you like, collectively. This is what happens when you give your power away. When you give your power away to other people, when you say, for instance, what are they going to do about it, instead of what am I going to do about it, those people will take that power and they'll recycle it back against you, which is how it works. There's 7.7 billion people in the world currently, apparently. Don't know who counts them, but anyway, 7.7 billion.
Google counts them.
Google counts them, yeah. And the number of people that are ultimately driving this control system and driving the direction of the world is little more than a handful right at the core. And that can only happen because the vast majority of the 7.7 billion have given their power away to someone else. And one way of giving your power away is not to check anything out. To listen to the news or listen to a politician, or more to the point, listen to the politician you prefer. I'm not listening to that one, I don't like them, they're the Tories. I'll listen to this one, Jeremy Corbyn, he knows. Whatever. By just taking that without question, you're giving your power away. You're giving your power away to form your own unique conclusions. Because of the postage stamp consensus, the amount of information, available information, that people receive through mainstream sources is tiny. It's pathetically tiny. You look at any news bulletin any day, they're talking about the same things in the same way. Every day. Look at the subjects that they cover. Yeah. Or now look at the range of subjects in the world that they don't cover, which is almost everything. It's very focused. And if we leave it there and don't check out do our own research, come to our own conclusions, then that which controls the information we receive and believe dictates our lives, and it does for the vast numbers of people. something. The Nazis were very, very significant in their understanding of perception manipulation. And if you read the quotes and the work of people like Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, you can see the techniques that are being used upon us now. It's very well worth reading. And one of their basic themes is, first of all, the bigger the lie, the more they will believe it, brackets, human-caused climate change. But another thing is, keep repeating the lie and it becomes accepted truth. Because if people keep hearing the same thing, they kind of take on it must be true because that's all they're hearing. But if you're getting it from the mainstream and the people around you who are repeating it, everybody knows that, everyone's saying the same, get it from the same source. Well, that means whatever controls that same source is downloading the perceptions of everybody. And because they're downloading the perceptions of everybody, as people interact with everybody, they come to the conclusion that this must be true because everybody is saying it.
Yeah.
Everybody believes it. And, I'm a bit like the kid in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, where people are accepting that the Emperor's got clothes on. A lot of the time because they don't really want to face the fact that the Emperor is naked. What does that mean to their lives? And I'm like the kid saying, actually, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? He's got no bloody clothes on. Look at him. What are you doing?
Yeah.
What do you mean? And you can be unpopular when you do that, but we're in a situation now where you're increasingly really unpopular with the system, which is a good thing, really. It confirms you're on the right track. But more and more people want to hear this stuff. They want to hear people and situations being called out for what they are, instead of being intimidated into silence and conformity by the tyranny that's going on all around us. Because there is an agenda, it's multiple faceted, and it's designed to transform human society. We're seeing it, it's happening, and it's nowhere near where it's meant to go. Now, many of the things that are in this agenda that we have to believe for this agenda to unfold and happen are so insanely ludicrous, are so ridiculous, are so stupid, that if you had open debate, they'd lose the argument.
Yeah, definitely.
For instance, I want to win an argument and thus have my will imposed on society that says men and women are not biologically different. Okay? Well, try winning that argument in an open debate where all the facts are available to be shared. You can't, because it's mad. So what do? You don't have the debate. How do you not have the debate?
Silence it.
Silence it by hurling abuse at anyone who is saying anything different to what you want people to believe, i.e. men and women are not biologically different. It's insane. And we've reached the point now where this censorship has got to the point where you've got professors of biology losing their jobs for saying that men and women are biologically different. It's insane. And you can... It's the same with this whole anti-Semitic industry, this protection racket for Israel, where you can't say anything against Israel or you're an anti-Semite. This is nothing more than shutting down the debate. Because Israel's treatment of Palestinians is so grotesque, and when I say Israel, I mean the Israeli government, the Israeli military, the extremists, the ultra-Zionists as I call them, is so outrageous, they can't win the debate. Because of that, they don't have one.
Yeah, they shut it down.
If you say anything critical in any way of the far right, psychopathic Israeli government, I'm undecided on this, by the way, then you're an anti-Semite. And so if I call out the Sicilian mafia, I'm anti every Italian, am I? Yeah. It's madness, but of course it's madness, but there's method in the madness because it's shutting down the debate.
Yeah, shutting down conversation.
Human-caused global warming. Human-caused climate change. Now, if you're confident of what you're saying is true, you want open debate, because then you've got the ability to show that what you're saying is true and what others are saying is not true. When you think you can't win the debate, if the whole range of information was put on the table, then you shut down the debate. And that's why now we're having, you're a climate change denier. Well, actually, I'm not, because the climate does change. The question is, why is it changing? And I was reading a very interesting book this week by an American meteorologist called Joe Bastardi, who has got so frustrated by hearing about weather events being blamed on climate change and human activity when he knows they're just secular. And he goes in this book, he says, well, this happened, say, last year or 2 years ago or whatever, and this is what they said. This is human-caused climate change. We're all gonna die. And then he goes back to the 1950s or the 1930s or the 1920s, and he shows the sequence of events that led to that. Because whether the Atlantic was warmer than the Pacific, whether the Pacific was warmer than the Atlantic, dictates a sequence of events that leads to a weather outcome. And it's a completely repeating cycle.
Yeah.
And but what happens, of course, is these people like Bastardi and his like, they are marginalized. Like the BBC decided some years ago now that the scientific argument was won. It hasn't even started, and thus they weren't going to have people on that were putting the other side of the story.
Yeah.
What are they doing? They're shutting down the debate.
I was going to say, that's what I think they're doing for a lot of topics. They're just trying to shut down the debate instead of actually just engaging in the conversation. They're just saying no, not having the conversation at all.
Exactly.
Something I wanted to touch on before as well, a big thing you touched on, and you were talking about the deception and how to find our way through the deception and things like that. Something you talk about is this. You call it innate intelligence versus the intellect.
Yeah.
Could you speak upon that, and what's the difference and how them two different roles play in shaping people's roles in society?
Well, first of all, if you want to know what the agenda is, then look at what you can't have another opinion about. That's a very simple rule of thumb, that. Because if you can't have another opinion about a subject, that's the agenda. Whatever they're saying about that subject, that's their agenda, because they're shutting the debate down by not letting you have an alternative opinion. The intellect. The intellect is that part of perception that operates within the postage stamp consensus. There was a story or an analogy by Plato, the Greek philosopher, the allegory of the cave, where he described a situation where there were these prisoners lined up, and they were chained up in a cave. And the only thing they could see was one wall of the cave. They couldn't see anything else. And behind them were fires which lit the wall that they were looking at. And then people and animals would walk past the fires behind them, and they'd cast shadows on the wall. Now, because these prisoners could only see the wall and the shadows, they thought that was reality. They thought that was reality. They thought that was the real world. And eventually one of the prisoners gets out, realizes it's not the real world, comes back and tells the other prisoners, this is not real, this is all a scam. and they weren't very pleased with it, which is kind of very symbolic of the response you get a lot of the time. But where I'm going with this is this. He said, as part of this analogy of the cave, that some of these prisoners became experts on the shadows of the wall. Experts on them. Knew everything about them. That's today's intellectuals.
Yeah.
They are experts on the postage stamp, on the shadows of the wall, on the wall. And because the postage stamp worships the intellect, if you are intellectual, if you know a lot about a little within the postage stamp, you are deemed to be very clever, and you become a professor, and you have letters after your name, and you're wheeled onto BBC programmes to pontificate about subjects you actually know nothing about. And basically, the postage stamp is the world of the known, or the perceived known. The world of academia, which operates in its almost in its entirety on the postage stamp, is all about the known. So you go to school, and what do they tell you? They tell you about the known. They tell you the official story of everything. The books you read tell you the official story of everything. The teachers do, the professors do, the lecturers do. And then you go out into the world, and you go into the world of work, and you might become a journalist, or a doctor, or scientist, or politician, whatever. And you take with you into that world this postage stamp consensus, which is all intellect, not expanded consciousness, intellect, largely unquestioned. Oh, hello, Mrs. Smith. Johnny's asking questions in the classroom. The Lord want to do it. Got to stop it, right?
Yeah.
This is how it works. And a lot of kids, they realize that if you just go with it, then life's easier than if you keep questioning, right? Because it's the carrot and the stick. So when you go out into the world, these institutions with your postage stamp norm, belief system, you meet loads of people there who've been through the same system earlier, and they're confirming to you that what you've learned, the postage stamp consensus, is normal and true, and everyone's confirming everything else to everyone else, that what the postage stamp consensus is actually real and true. And therefore the rules of society dictate that for you to be taken seriously and have credibility, and for you to become an academic and an intellectual, you must conform to the norms. Because what are exams that lead you down this road to academia and all the rest of it and all these other institutions? What are they? They are a test of whether you've absorbed the belief system or not. And if you've absorbed it well and you repeat it on the exam paper, you pass your exams. If you think it's a load of old crap, and like me, you spent your school days looking out the window watching the football and the games lessons, then you are considered stupid. But what it's all based on is the intellect. And largely the intellect is in the left side of the brain. The brain has two hemispheres, which, again, this is mainstream science, and they have very different ways of decoding and perceiving, processing information, reality. Yeah. The left brain basically is the world of the intellect. It's the world that we experience all the time. The left brain is about just words. It's about numbers. It's about everything. It sees everything as apart from everything else. It sees everything in structure. You've got the right side of the brain, which is more, hey man, out there, creativity, the artist, the maverick that won't conform. This is conformity. And if you look at the education system, it's becoming worse all the time. It's all about focusing at everything on the left side of the brain, which I would call the intellect. So even in almost in preschool now, they're doing more kind of normal academic lesson type stuff, And what they're doing, the teachers don't realize this, but in the shadows, they absolutely know exactly what they're doing. What they want to do, and this is why they want to get kids from their families as early as possible into the school system, in the preschool system and then the school system.
It's crazy that, sorry to jump in, but it's crazy that whole situation of how kids, like I think it's at 3 years old, straight away you're sitting in front of a desk, and then you get to a certain amount of age again, then you're at a desk again in your job.
Exactly. Well, what if you think about it? I mean, just take a deep breath and kind of look at it. You've just come into the world, right? You've just arrived.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And how much time do you have before you hit this programming system called education? It's getting smaller. And you've also got your parents who've been through the same system.
Yeah, they're indoctrinated.
And if they take on the program, they're going to pass it on to you even before you go to school, on the basis not of malevolence, but they think that's how things are, and they're doing the right thing. So very quickly, this mind that's just arrived in the world is plonked in a desk, and an authority figure is giving them the state's version of everything, telling them when they can speak, when they can go to the toilet, when they can eat, etc. And you've only just arrived, and this then goes on through the formative years. And if you notice, what's been happening is that part of the education system that stimulates the right side of the brain, first of all, things like music and art, they are being marginalized and defunded while everything's focused on the left brain intellect. Because what they're doing systematically is putting people in the left side of the brain and getting them to see the world from that point of view and shutting this down. Now, what opens this more than anything else? Ad-lib play. What is ad-lib play? It is imagination. Yeah. This is imagination. This is how you imagine new things. This is the world of the known recycling itself. This is the imagination and the creativity that sees things differently, and is extremely creative beyond the boom, boom, boom of the left side of the brain. So they don't want that. They want conformity. They don't want mavericks and creatives that they can't control. Yeah. And so they're shutting down that whole area. What else are they doing? They give you homework. So when you go from the programming center, school, you take the programming center home, and boom, boom, boom. Then you are on social media or some other form of kind of games they play, and it's all bang, bang, bang. Really, it's all left brain. It's not really creative. It's responding to the game rather than being creative. And basically, they're shutting people down and they're imprisoning them in the intellect. Now, innate intelligence is different, completely different. Innate intelligence doesn't think, it knows. And when you think about what we call intuition, where do we feel intuition? We don't feel it here. Yeah. Feel it here. Yeah. And you can see the body language. People say, I just know. Or they say, I'm thinking. The hand is going to where the point of information, of inspiration is coming from. Yeah. And because the brain, particularly the left side of the brain, is absolutely welded and imprisoned by the postage stamp consensus intellect, it knows so little because what it's learned is so little compared with what is possible to know. And because of that, it keeps trying to work things out because it doesn't know, so it's got to try and think and work it out. Whereas innate intelligence, which comes from here, just knows. I just know. The information that I've put together over the years, a vast library of information now, last 30 years. When I started out, the first small first period, I would receive information and I'd work it out and come to conclusions from working it out. And then after not very long, in the 1990s, this flipped, not least because of, paranormal experiences I was having, really, not paranormal, normal experiences. I need to put up there, normal experiences, but they're called paranormal because compared with the postage stamp, they're not normal, therefore they're paranormal. No, they're not, they're perfectly normal. Yeah. But it's just that you're in a mind prison. And what happened was I started to just know what the situation was. I just know. And then the information, names, dates, places, would come into my life that would confirm that initial, I know it's like this. This is how I think it is, or I know it is. And this is innate intelligence. Now, why does that know and that think? Because this is operating within this tiny band of frequency we call the human world. And it's so tiny. I mean, if you look at what mainstream science says about the electromagnetic spectrum, it says that it's 0.005% of what exists in the universe. And the universe is just one expression of infinity. And some say it's a bit more, but not by much. It's tiny. Now, that's the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light, which is the only frequency band that we can see, that everything we see in what we call the visible world is within that band, is a smear, tiny smear of the 0.005%. So we are basically blind in terms of what we see and perceive compared with what there is in infinite reality, even in this universe. And so you are, by definition, going to be incredibly limited in what you know if you come only from that level of reality, because you only know what you're told to know by the system. Yeah. This this heart connection here takes you out there. What they want is that they want the head, the brain, to dominate the heart, because they want intellectual, learned intelligence to overpower innate, knowing intelligence. So you then let this expand and connect out there, and you listen to it, and it speaks to you. Yeah. You just know. You just know. How did you know that? Because I just knew. And you got people like Einstein, who said that none of his major discoveries were made with his conscious mind. They were made by this, knowing beyond the head, thinking. And what this whole system is, and education, of course, is the central pillar of it, is to keep us in states of ignorance by controlling information and by keeping us in the realm only of thought and intellect. And of course, what are exams? They're testing the intellect. Yeah. What is education? What are lessons? What are lectures at universities? They're all speaking to the intellect. And I remember when I was first asked to go and debate and speak at the Oxford Union, this ancient debating society at Oxford University, which is laid out basically like the House of Commons, not quite, but the same principle. I went along. I left school at 15 to go and play football. Never passed a major exam in my life. And I'm turning up at Oxford University, all these kind of, very clever people, intellectual people. And of course, what's going to happen? Well, I've probably been about 5 or 6 times, not for a long time, but about 5 or 6 times. I can honestly tell you, I've never once been asked a single challenging question. Not one. Because with the odd exception, you're talking to a program. You are talking to a software program which sees the world in such limited terms, because that's what the software program is meant to do, that you kind of listen to them and debate with them, and you're going, what are you talking about? Why can't you just see the obvious? Well, they can't. But because they're all at this esteemed academic institution, Oxford University or Cambridge University, and they're all told that they're special because they're very clever. They've got a place at Oxford. Oh, jolly good. I had a place at Oxford as well. Oxford United I played for. But I'd rather be there than Oxford University.
So would I as well.
But the point is that they then confirm to themselves that because they're Oxford University, they must know. The last time I was there, speaking at Oxford, the Oxford Union, they give you a bit of food before at this hotel nearby, and I was sitting there, and there was some students sitting down around, kind of obviously to do with the union. And this guy, I don't know what he'd be, 18, something like that. And he's going on and on and on about how I can't be right. Not that he's read anything. Yeah. And he is just spewing out the postage stamp consensus like someone's pressed enter. But because he's very knowledgeable about the postage stamp consensus, he's an intellectual and perceived to be very clever. But actually, it's not clever at all. It's a program. And my son, Gareth, I mean, he really pushed the boat out when he went to school because he was getting E's. Not even D's, he was getting E's.
Same as me.
Because he kind of sussed it and realised it was a load of rubbish and incredibly boring. And you talk to him now, he's a highly intelligent man with multiple skills. And people that were perceived to be his intellectual superiors at school, because they passed the exams, we've got A's. They're either doing nothing with their lives, or they're doing jobs they would rather not do.
Yeah, good point.
So what was the point of it all? And because innate intelligence always trumps learned intelligence, if you can access that innate intelligence, then you'll always get on far better than people with that closed and everything in here.
Yeah, I love that. I really want to respect your time, but I just wanted to touch on one more topic. I wanted to speak about, I know you had an ayahuasca experience.
Yeah.
I wanted to speak about that, and what's your thoughts on that, and what do you think's actually going on in that realm?
Well, I took ayahuasca twice over 2 nights in 2003, and I had a phenomenal experience. On the second night, I had a voice as loud as mine is now, female form it took, talking to me for 5 hours about the nature of reality. It was hilarious. It was just taking apart reality as we perceive it, this solid world and all that stuff. And for whatever reason, I had total recall of it afterwards. And I came back to Britain and I started researching to check out what I was told. And I found that if you put the dots together within the various disciplines of science, not least quantum physics, what that voice said was phenomenally accurate, right? And what it's doing is basically opening channels that allow you to consciously access other levels of reality. So a voice, and what is a voice? All that voice was sound wave information. See, I'm talking to you now, and words are not passing between us.
Yeah, definitely.
They are waveform information fields generated by my vocal cords are passing between us, and it goes through that process. The ear turns them into electrical information to the brain, and the brain hears them. So in the same way, what I experienced in that ayahuasca state as a female voice was actually a waveform information. And I decoded it into a female voice because that was the frequency it was operating on. And it's opening those channels so you can access consciously levels of reality that you wouldn't normally consciously experience. So, for instance, I might have an intuitive knowing. I think this world's an illusion. I think it works like this, but I don't consciously hear it. I feel it. But when the channels open with ayahuasca, now you are hearing consciously what you're feeling without an ayahuasca, being in an ayahuasca state. It's the same information, it's the same communication, it's the same decoding, but at a different level.
It sort of strips away the intellect as well.
It does. Yes, absolutely, it does that. But ayahuasca takes you in many ways to where you already are, because in the same group that I took this stuff in the rainforest of Brazil were people that took the same stuff in the same amounts and had nightmare situations, because it takes you to where you already are, and you know, if you have demons, it will take you to demons. If you don't, certainly at that point, have demons, then it will take you somewhere else. It just takes you to where you already are. And you know, it was an interesting thing. I mean, this voice was fascinating, and my belly was aching because I was just laughing, because it was just taking the piss out of how we perceive the world.
Yeah.
But one of the things, what this voice kept saying, it would say something, a bit like the Morpheus character. Do you think that's air you're breathing now?
Yeah, I love
that kind of thing. It was going on like that, you know. And said at the end, do you think ayahuasca brought you to this place?
Oh, wow, I like that.
Illusion. Right? And everything's an illusion, because everything's a perception. See, we are interacting with this, what I call cosmic Wi-Fi, this information field that's encoded with information, which we decode. This is why you see this room, I see this room, because the information of this, which we decode into this room, is encoded into this cosmic Wi-Fi, so we experience it. But beyond it, you know, you may look at this room and say, oh, it's quite a nice room. I may look at the room and say, oh, it's shite.
Yeah.
In other words, we experience the same basic background, but the way we perceive it is totally different depending on our perception. And why do things happen to certain people and not happen to others? Why do some people live very limited lives and others live expansive lives? Well, you know, if you're on the internet and you're sitting there and you think, where do I go on the internet? Well, you make choices. So you go to this website, which might expand your awareness, or you might go to another website, you know, some entertainment thing, you know, who's betting who and what's the latest and that stuff. And in fact, you won't expand your awareness. Yeah. So it's a kind of a choice. And the choices that of this field of possibility and probability we decode into a personal experience, the choice is made by perception. And this is why this cabal in the shadows knows that if it can control human perception, it can control human experience. And I tell you what I mean by that. If you first of all, everything is a frequency. Everything. Every emotion is a frequency. Every thought is a frequency. And they've worked the frequencies out. They worked them out decades ago, if not earlier, whereby certain, like fury and anger and rage, they have frequencies. And they've worked it out to the point where they can broadcast that frequency, say of rage, across a community, And they can basically cock the trigger on that rage by the frequencies they're sending out, which the brain and body are decoding as if it's coming from within, because it's just the same frequency. And then they will maybe trigger an incident. Maybe the police will beat up a black guy or something. And the community is now so on the gun is cocked emotionally because of what the frequency they've put out, that all hell breaks loose and riots happen and stuff. And they can trigger that. They can manipulate human emotion. They can manipulate human perception like that. So because everything's a frequency, your perceptions of self and the world represent a frequency, and as they change, the frequency changes. So for instance, if you think that you're just little me, you have no power, all I am is my labels, and I am my job, I'm my name, I'm my life story, I'm my family history, whatever, and that's me, then that perception will translate into a band of frequency that will be very narrow and very low, because it's not expansive. And so you are interacting with the fields all around us of possibility and probability, the quantum fields as they call them, within that frequency band. And you create a feedback loop. Just as the computer is creating a feedback loop with Wi-Fi, and as you make choices to move around the internet, it is decoding Wi-Fi in a different way to take you somewhere else. So our perceptions translate as frequencies and bands of frequency, which we then interact with the cosmic Wi-Fi upon. And if you have a very narrow sense of self-identity, then that interaction is going to be very, very small and limited. And that is going to manifest a life experience of limitation, of I can't. That will never happen to me. All the best things always happen to other people. And you're going to live a very limited life, not because you're limited, you're infinite, but because you perceive you are limited, and thus you experience that feedback loop of limitation. When you reevaluate your self-identity, and you can do it in an instant. Don't let anybody kid you. You've got to go on fasts and bloody quests and sit cross-legged on a bloody mountain for days at a time. You haven't. It's a myth. You change your perception, you change your life. What is sitting on a mountain cross-legged? What is sitting doing yoga? What is going on a quest and fasting? It's a belief that if I do that, this will be the outcome. You are creating a reality on the basis of belief that the outcome will follow the action, right? Well, how about the action's not necessary, because that's just feeding your perception that the outcome's on the end. Why not just know the outcome without the action, by changing your perception of reality from I am little me and I have no power to I am all that is, has been, and ever can be, having an experience. And that expansion of self-identity means that you start to operate on an expanded higher frequency. And therefore, your interaction with the cosmic Wi-Fi field, if you like, of possibility and probability is now massively expanded compared with I'm little me, I have no power. So now you are able to pull things out of the ether as an experience, as a coincidence. My God, what's the chances of that happening where someone else is not? Not because you're better than someone else, but because you are operating on a different scale of interaction with possibility and probability. Why is it? Happened to me. Why is it that when people start to go through this awakening process, which is what re-self-identity process, that's what it is, re-awareness process, that they start to realize that suddenly there's synchronicity in their life, that coincidences start to happen that weren't happening before. Oh my God, fancy seeing you here. What's the chances of that? The reason that's happening is expanded consciousness. As you wake up and reevaluate self-identity and reality, you are now moving deeper and deeper into the quantum field of possibility and probability. So what does that mean? Your ability to manifest possibility and probability as an experience increases and expands, and that's what happens. And to bring it round to how we started, the cabal in the shadows driving human society knows this. It knows it. It's terrified of this process happening, and so everything is humanity is bombarded 24/7, because these days through frequencies, technological frequencies, it's in your sleep as well, to focus your attention on a small an area of sense of the possible as they can, because they have to hold us in these, basically it's a prison of focus, it's a prison of perception, because if they don't, it's over. And this is why they're terrified of this awakening that's going on, and why they're running around trying to shut it down. Well, all the best with that one.
Yeah, all the best. I love that. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Real pleasure.
It really is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Cool really. Podcast, really cool.
Good to speak to you.
Thank you so much.
No problems.